So this is a different intro compared to the other show.
Christian, you like this one?
Ooh. Dangerous.
Got the little shoulder.
Yeah, you can cut it up a little bit, right, AD? Right? Huh? It's okay.
I can see it.
Welcome into the Recipe Podcast, Celebrity Secrets to a Successful Life. I'm your host, Chef Charles Carroll. What a great day. What a great day. What a great show we have for you today. This is the Gourmet Club live episode of what we do here. We now have 4 shows. We have 4 different shows. Oh, wow. The Unplugged with our comedian AD in-house, and he's actually hanging out because he just loves bees. Mm-hmm. Or you just love honey. I'm not sure which.
I love the honey.
He likes the honey, right? So, Monica, thanks for being here. Everything good on your end?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're still a little sluggish here. We talked about that. Jay, everything working over there?
Oh yeah, everything's
Are
fine.
you sure?
Yeah.
All right, Aaron's you're on board.
Scoot down a little bit.
Are you sure?
Sorry.
Are you sure
Monica?
you're here, Aaron? Because last time
Gotta
you
get
were,
my best side.
yeah.
Gotta get the angles.
We also have in-house Erwin. Mr. Erwin, he's a beekeeper. He's a master beekeeper, right?
Right.
And you live here in Houston?
Right.
And so I ran into Ed. Ed and I had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and we're thinking about doing some beehives at our place of work, and which is actually big. I don't want to say it's a trend, but you're seeing a lot more about bees around the country, and I think it started. I want to say 5. I'm going to let you tell the story, but I know that at least as a chef, 5, 6, 8 years ago, we're all worried about the bee population because we're starting to lose them a little bit. And I don't know if that's what kicked off the interest with everybody, but it certainly helped. But welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so why don't you tell everybody, Ed, a little bit about you and how you got into the beekeeping deal.
Okay. Well, I'm the executive director of Bee Harmony, and that's a dating service for single bees. So if you have some friends you need. No, actually, we're a nonprofit organization, and the focus is not about honey, but about pollination. And AJ mentioned he loves honey, and that's what, when people think about bees, they think honey. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a great byproduct. But the big problem, as you were talking about, is we're losing a lot of bees, and it's critical their pollination for the crops we eat, the things we eat. If you go to a grocery store, if we were to lose just the honeybees, every third item you would see, fruit, vegetables, nuts, would be gone. Mm-hmm. That's how much we are dependent on the honeybees.
And so tell us why. Why does the honeybees make those plants flourish?
Because they are the ones that pollinate the plants.
Okay.
And with the pollination, you get the fruit, the vegetables, the nuts. And without that pollination, it doesn't happen.
Like avocados and almonds and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Like right now, almonds in the month of February there are about 800,000 acres of almond trees in California. All those have to be pollinated by honeybees, and those bees are brought by beekeepers to California in semi-truckloads, and they will bring over 1 million hives in the month of February to California to just pollinate the almonds.
Have they always done that, or just recently because there's an issue?
They've always done it.
Always done it. Okay.
Yeah, they've always done it, and it's been a very I'll say popular thing that's have to have happened since about the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And so what has happened, and it's actually one of the problems of bees, or where they're having a problem, is that you've got loss of habitat. And if you just drive any direction out of Houston, anytime you get into I'll call it the farming area, you just see land that's just flat. Mm-hmm. It's nothing but just dirt. Bring yourself back to, let's say, 1945, and think of a Norman Rockwell photograph. In that picture, you would probably imagine a farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a red barn, dirt road, and on one side there'd be an orchard, there'd be a pond, there'd be a vegetable garden, there'd be a pasture of flowers. Perfect habitat for bees. Mm-hmm. You can't find that anymore. Mm-hmm. And so we have done away with the habitat. And when so you had a farm like that, and more often than not, in the farms back in the late 40s, early 50s, they had their own hives, and that took care of the pollination. Well, once you went to the monoculture, and you just have fields of you pick it, vegetables, fruits, or apple orchards, you have to have those bees to pollinate, and there are professional beekeepers that take those hives around in semi-trucks, and it's all planned to arrive when the various plants are needing their pollination. So those bees that go to California right now will be there about a month, and things that flower, they only flower for a very short period of time before they need to pollinate, maybe a couple of weeks. And once a bee pollinates that flower, it stops producing nectar, which is what the attraction is of the bee. And once that happens, they will leave there and begin moving north along the west coast, and they'll start pollinating apples and plums and pears, and they'll eventually make their way around to do alfalfa. And the same thing is happening in the East Coast. They're going around doing cranberries, cherries. There's, I think, 94 different major products that you would get at the store that we depend on that are pollinated by just the honeybee. So
The bee is the only thing that can pollinate. The only animal.
no, there's actually several different, I'll say, insects that pollinate.
Okay.
You like some beetles pollinate, and there's really two classes of bees. There's what's called the solitary bees, and in the world there are about 20,000 different types of bees, species of bees.
Wow.
In the U.S., there's 4,000. They all live by themselves. They don't produce honey. Now, there's about 14 to 28 varieties of honeybees. Okay, and they're the ones that produce the honey. Now, let me kind of back up, if I can, to kind of get you how all this happened. So, you've heard of Jurassic period, Jurassic Park. 130 million years ago, approximately, the Earth started changing from a cooler climate, and we had more conifers and ferns, to a warmer climate. So we're talking about climate change. It's happened many, many times. The Earth began to get warmer, and we had more flowering plants. Flowering plants require pollination in which to perpetuate their species. So they began to evolve where they produced a nectar, and they've got the stamen pedestal, and which creates the pollen, and it's got to be transferred. That nectar, which is basically sucrose, sugar, attracts the pollinators. And so the first bee, not a honeybee, but a bee species, came about 130 million years ago. And so over time, these different bees evolved, but about 25 million years ago, the first honeybees evolved in Asia. And honeybees, what they did was they actually began to live in crevices or caves or cracks, and they began to make honeycomb and begin to store honey. Now that allows them to actually keep their whole colony together and live through the winter. During the winter, you don't have anything to eat. You don't have any flowers to go to. You don't get any nectar. So they began to develop this process. Now over time, so how these bees got to where we are today. What happens in the honeybee is, so let me back up on the solitary bees. What they do is they will live usually for 1 year and they die, but they will mate in the fall. The female will deposit an egg either in a hole in a log or a hole in the ground, and she'll also leave it with a ball of pollen and some nectar, and she'll leave that egg on top of that. And so the following spring, that egg becomes a larva, a pupa. It begins to mature. It comes out as a new bee. So it's not a colony of bees. It's just solitary bees.
Just one bee comes from that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how the solitary bees live and exist.
I thought bees only live about 2 months.
Honeybee.
Honeybee, okay.
Yeah, the solitaries will live for the year.
Gotcha.
Or, spring through, say, fall, and then they'll deposit their egg, and then they die.
So they only have one egg?
The solitaries. So I'm saying, yes, that's generally correct. 20,000 species, there may be some that, have multiple eggs. But,
Yeah.
but the point is they don't live in a colony
Yeah.
like you think of honeybees. So the way the honeybee perpetuates its species is that you may have seen or heard about a swarm.
Yeah.
And I know, like sometimes
AD's favorite. He likes swarms.
I'm very like dive deep into this because I had a question, but I want to continue to listen to you.
Yeah. So sometimes you see like sporting news, you'll see a bunch of bees flying all around a baseball field and everybody's ducking. And what's happening there is they are out looking for a new place to live. So how they perpetuate their species. There's in the hive, and we're talking about honeybees now, there's one queen, and the queen is actually the largest bee in the hive. And then there are the drones, and they are the males. And there's fall and spring, or summer and spring, there's no more than about 200. Now, let me back up. You'd ask about how long they live. The queen will live 3 to 4 years. The drone, about 90 days.
Good to be queen.
Great to be quiet.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, what does the drone do?
Okay, yeah.
The drone does absolutely no work. It's fed by the worker bees, who are all females. Its only purpose is to mate with the virgin queen.
Wow.
Wow.
So as a guy, you're thinking, sign me up.
Pretty good job.
Right.
Now, if they do manage to catch the queen, which is done in flight, in what's called a drone congregation area. All these drones fly and they try to catch the queen. When they do mate, everything immediately gets pulled out of their little body and they fall dead.
Oh, shit.
Now, if you don't manage...
So don't fuck with the queen. Am I right or no?
Yeah, but this automatically gives Beyonce fans some leverage. This is what this conversation sounds like. Don't tell a Beyonce fan this story.
All right,
Yeah,
sorry.
so-
sorry.
But go ahead. I'm
Go
sorry.
on, keep it.
I'm not even going into the graphic details.
No, not that part. But
I have not heard this, but I understand you can literally hear this popping sound when that happens
Wow.
of the male.
Yeah.
Okay, so the male drops dead, but he's mated with the queen. Now, she will mate with between 15 and 20 different drones over like a 3-day period. She will store millions of sperm. She'll come back to the hive, and then her only purpose is to lay eggs every day, particularly spring and summer, about 1,500 to 2,000
Wow.
a day.
Will she ever fly after that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, she doesn't just go fly for the fun of it or anything like that. She is fed, she is clean, she is completely taken care of by the worker bees. Now, back to those swarms. Okay, so as the hive builds, and so the rest of the bees you see, like the ones you see out on the flowers, those are all female. They are the worker bees. Those only live about 2 months.
Okay.
The first 21 days they live in the hive. They come out, they're an egg, a pupa, a larva, and that's about 10, 13 days period. They come out as a full adult, but then their job changes over the next 11, 12 days. They go from taking care of all this honeycomb that's in there, making sure that the honeycomb spaces where the queen's going to lay eggs is clean so she can continue to lay eggs. And as that hive builds up, you kind of run out of space. So what that queen will do then, they all communicate with what's called pheromones. It's a scent. She will release a pheromone that says, okay, guys, half of us are leaving. We're going to go find a new home. She then gathers up half the bees. They gorge themselves with honey. Okay, and that's when you see at the baseball field, all these bees are flying around. They're basically looking for a new place to live. And when you see a big blob of bees, about the size of a football, hanging on a tree, there's no danger at all to that, because those bees, they are not protecting their honey or their hive, so they're not aggressive. And because all those worker bees have gorged themselves with honey, it's kind of like Thanksgiving Day after the meal. You can't move. They cannot even bend to sting. So they're just this clump of bees. They send scouts out to find a new place to live, They'll find it usually in your attic, something like that. And then that's where they go, and they will build a new hive, or they'll start rebuilding honeycomb. And they build that honeycomb with the honey they've eaten. And honeycomb is made of beeswax.
Right.
So now you've got a whole new colony started. They built the beeswax. The queen starts laying new eggs, but you've got this hive over here that's got a bunch of workers and maybe some drones, but no queen.
No queen.
So they have to make a new queen. So what they do is they pick about 5 to 8 different of the larvae that have previously been laid by the queen, and they feed it what's called royal jelly. You may have heard of that term. And it's actually a food substance secreted at the top of their head. And they feed that larva royal jelly. And it will become a queen bee. And I'll say there's 8 of them. The first one out usually goes around and kills the other 7. After about 3 days, she matures a little bit. She goes out and does this mating ritual again. And back she comes to the hive, and she starts the process over. So you've got that hive starting anew. You got this new one over here coming along. So back up to 25 million years ago, and that's what was happening with the honeybees. They were perpetuating their species. They were beginning to move east and west. And the eastern honeybee is, over in Eastern Asia, and that's not what we're talking. We're talking about the western honeybee. So it began to move across Asia and Europe. Now, at some point, part of those hives went south into Africa. And you've probably heard about Africanized bees, the killer bees, very aggressive. So let me take you down that path for just a moment. So in Africa, you think about the migration every year. And basically all those animals are following the grasses that are growing because of the rain. Same thing happens with the bees in Africa. They need to follow those areas that have flowering plants, and so they keep moving along, right along with all the animals that are going along in this circular pattern. But in Africa, you don't have cool weather, so you don't have the need for storing honey, like I'll say the Western European bee, because you don't have cool weather. You've got flowers all the time. You're chasing the flowers. But in Africa, everything either stings you, bites you, or sticks you. So it's a very aggressive place, and that's and a lot of things, animals over there are trying to get into their hive to get what honey they have. So they become very aggressive over the years. Okay, so let's park the bees in Africa for a minute. Now you go up to Europe. So the last small ice age was about 13,000 years ago. So the bees in Europe really didn't move up in there until about 11,000 years ago. But they moved up there. They pollinate the different things. And
A lot more arrogant in Europe, are those bees. They're arrogant bees, aren't they?
They
You
are.
got the killer bees in South Africa.
Now, hold on. Don't go there yet till you know there's this story.
All right.
Maybe that arrogance came over here.
Yeah, I'll copy that.
Okay, so the honeybee is not native to North or South America. It is not native. But the colonists who came over here brought the same sort of plants, vegetables, things like that over here to grow them here. Well, they didn't do a very good job of it. Now, in North America, you had the solitary bees, which do some pollination, but not good enough. In Europe, by that time, you had people who were actually the beekeeper of the village, and they managed what was, at that time, they kept the bees in what's called a skep, which is a beehive made of woven grasses. And they kept those bees in there, and that's where they got their honey, but they kept those near where they were growing their fruits and vegetables because they realized that they were pollinating those things and helped them grow and it produced more product, and so to speak. So they realized that they need to get bees over here. And so they had shipped some beehives on 1622, the first bees arrived. Now, 1622, you had sailing ships. And it took about 6 to 8 weeks to get here. So you could probably get a cheap ticket on that ship with a bunch of beehives. Now, I understand what they actually did is put them in boxes and kind of sealed up the hive, which the bee can live in there without any problem. Brought them over. And so that perpetuation of their species process started here in North America. And they began to, they would each year, or usually once a year, they would swarm, go out and start a new hive. And most of those were what you would call feral hives, or wild bees in trees or, caves, things like that. But beekeepers learned that if they, put those bees in the hive and they could take them, that they kept them near their farms or their places like that. So you have all these bees now moving through North America, South America. And everything was going pretty good until about World War II. And in World War II, actually World War I, you get really the first introduction of chemical poisons with, the poison gas, things like that. Like World War II, we got pretty sophisticated on this stuff.
Agent Orange and all that.
Not yet.
Okay.
But it's
That's NAM.
Yeah.
but so anyway, if you mentioned about the arrogant Europeans, well, yeah, most of the bees in the U.S. that first came over were actually what they called Italian bees. They were actually from Italy, and then there were some from Germany and a few other places. But those are basically the types of bees that came over here. Today, you could pretty much call them mutts. They've sort of intermingled, intermixed, and interbred, so it's kind of, you don't have a pure Italian bee, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason they liked the Italian bee, it was reasonably gentle. It was not aggressive, and it was easy to manage, as opposed to, let's say, the African bee. The African bee is very, very aggressive. Now, so then you get into, let's start moving a little bit forward and say, what are the problems here in the U.S.? I already talked about loss of habitat. You just don't have places for the bees to live. You also have
Well, let's get into that a little
Okay.
bit. Let's get into the habitat. So, if we have a lot of hospitality people listening to the show, a lot of chefs, a lot of people in the industry, and a lot of young people too. So if we have a listener out there that wants to put one of these hives on their property, like the conversation we had the other day, or they want to have one in their backyard, right? Can anybody just put one of these in their backyard without any licenses or anything like that?
That's correct.
All right. So Aaron has a house and with a relatively good sized backyard. What does he need to do if he wants to put in a couple of those hives back there? What's he need to do?
He needs to go to beeharmony.org.
All right, let's get that out. Wait, before because I'll forget to ask you. Sit up a little bit.
Okay.
There you go.
beeharmony.org.
Okay.
Now there's another one who actually tried to buy our name, Bee Harmony Honey. That ain't us.
Okay.
They sell honey. We don't sell
Oh,
honey.
I saw that website.
And I'm not saying don't buy it from them, but that's not us. We're beeharmony.org. Now on that site you will see some articles that I've written, and one of those is about what you need to know and do to start a hive. And it will go all through the various things of, do you have the proper sort of location? And in that, what I'm really talking about, can you keep that beehive out of sight? Because you said you were afraid of them.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are. So you need to keep that out of sight. Don't make a big deal of it. You need to have water available. And you don't have to have running water. I mean, they like just murky, yucky water because they get minerals from it. And it goes through various things in there to know and think about. And then there's another section in there that talks about the initial hives and and so I'm also the director of what's called the Mentor-Mentee program, Montgomery County Beekeepers Association. And so if you live up north, come to that program. And we have a year-long program for people who are thinking about getting bees, and it takes them through every month all the things you need to think about, how you need to do it. We sort of teach them how. But on that site, you'll find those same articles, and then obviously you can go on the internet and find different articles of how to do it. But that's kind of step one. Do you have the right sort of location? Generally, I would say yes. Most people, if you have a backyard, you're good to go. Now, don't assume you've got to have the right flowers, plants for bees, because the bee goes out 2.5 to 3 miles to find what it wants. And what it wants is really driven by what the queen says we need right now. Now, what they bring back is nectar, pollen, water, and tree sap. Now, the nectar,
Couple of beers, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody bringing something to the party. BYOB.
Yeah.
so,
yeah.
okay, so, but if you're drinking a soda, and most of you probably experienced this, where a bee comes and it's flying around your soda can, it's smelling that sugar water, basically nectar. You mentioned when you were talking about a bee coming around in a cologne or something. A lot of times a bee will come and be flying around you. Now that, let's just say it's one bee and it's a solid, it's not the hive, it's just one bee. It's out looking for the nectar, and it smells whatever scent, the soap, the shampoo, the cologne that you use that day, and it's going to investigate it. So it's going to fly around, and it may land on you. Don't swat it. Just, this is easy to say, hard to do. Just let it land, leave it alone. It'll figure out you're not a flower, and it'll take off. If you try to swat a bee, it's going to get defensive. If you try to fight a bee, I can absolutely guarantee you it's going to win. Now, one of the reasons you can't really swat a bee and win.
We'll see about that.
I'm going to tell you how to remove the stinger in just a second.
Oh, okay, good.
So bees have what's called compound eyes. They have 13,000 lenses. And those lenses act similar to the pixels on your television.
Okay.
And those lenses turn off and on as the bee flies and it sees movement of, let's say, a flower. It sees movement better than we just see still things. It doesn't see things very well far off or even close, but it sees movement really well. Now, if you take your hands and take them all the way back behind you, that's how far a bee can see with its eyes. So the only place you're going to really have a chance to swat a bee is in its tail, where its stinger is. Now, in the event you get stung, what you need to do is, so more often than not, what will happen is that stinger has a barb on it. That bee is going to pull itself away, and it's going to rip all that stuff out. And you're going to see the barb, and you're going to see a little bitty sac. That sac is the venom sac. That's poison. That will continue to pump for 10 minutes. So you need to get that off of you. Now, if you reach down and squeeze to get that out, you're going to squeeze the venom in you. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is you want to take your fingernail, you want to take a credit card, scrape it off. Just scrape it off. It'll come right off. And then you use ice, Benadryl, something like that if you have a bit of a reaction. But don't squeeze the stinger. Now, what will also happen when that bee stings you, it will, and its stinger, it will emit what's called alarm pheromone. Now, bees have about 34 different pheromone scents that they send out. And what that is telling other bees, there's something bad, something that's trying to get us, trying to get our honey, that will bring them to that same site. And they'll start stinging.
Oh, shit.
So what I tell people, if you see bees, on the flowers, out in the yard, out in the field, just leave them alone. They're not after you. They don't care about you. Now, they may smell you and what's this big flower? But don't go near a hive. And a hive could be just, you see a bunch of bees flying in and out of a hole in a wall or a tree, or particularly a beehive. Just don't go near it.
Then how are you supposed to get their honey?
Well, so as you buy your hives and you put your bees in, you're going to go through the process of learning how to extract that hive. And the key to that is having the right sort of equipment. Have you ever seen a beekeeper with their bee suit on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They have a bee suit. They also have a smoker.
Yeah.
Okay. And they pump that smoker, and it puts a smoke into the hive.
At least some of these, right?
No, the bees then they think,
Do they get high?
no.
Oh.
They think that there is something happening like a fire,
Okay.
a forest fire. They start going into the hive and gathering honey. They begin to gorge themselves because they think we may need to leave. And then you begin to go through, you just very slowly, very patiently, and you only do it on pretty days of about 70 degrees. Because if you do it when it's colder, you'll actually chill the bees and they'll die. And if you do it on rainy, bad, stormy days, they get pretty aggressive and they will come out after you. Now, with that bee suit, you're pretty unlikely you'll get stung. So that doesn't mean you won't. They can sometimes get through that suit. But that's how you would get the honey. But you only get the honey no more than twice a year. Maybe in the spring. I extract all mine in the fall. Now I did bring something. So in that beehive, if you've seen, usually it's a white box. In there, there are, in each box section, there are 10 of these. And these are called frames. And you can see on there, all this white, that's honey. The bees have brought the nectar in. And the nectar is from the flowers. And it's predominantly sucrose, which is sugar. And what that bee does is it stores that nectar from that flower in what they call a honey pouch. But actually, it's just the nectar pouch at that point. In that pouch, there are enzymes, and they begin to break down the sucrose. And before it's put into this honeycomb, that bee will transfer it to other worker bees about 200 times. And those enzymes begin to break down the sucrose into glucose and fructose. And so that's predominantly what honey is.
They're churning it.
Yeah, but they'll put it into that hive, and they will keep removing the moisture until it's about 18%. When it's 18%, they'll then put this white cap of honey on it. And once it's there, it'll never go bad.
Is that white cap? Isn't that wax? Or
It's wax, yeah,
Okay.
that the bees have produced. And this picture is a bunch of bees. This is the honeycomb. This is capped honey. Remember I said the pollen?
Mhm.
This is pollen. The pollen is a protein for the younger larva. The honey is the carbohydrate for the bees.
So they have to build the comb, the honeycomb
Yeah.
too.
And
And why is it so amazingly perfectly accurate? How is that possible?
I don't know that.
You know what I can't believe about these bees? They only live for two months.
Yeah, that's what got
They
me.
get so much done.
I'll have a cook for 6 years and I still can't train the son of a bitch. These bees have 2 months
To get it right.
and they know that at day 3 they got to get up and get their ass to work. They got to get outside. They have to go. They have exactly 2 miles. They know they can build that honeycomb. That honeycomb is so accurately like a spider's web. You know what these animals do. It's just ridiculous how brilliant they are. I mean,
It is the hexagon is the most efficient form to store things. And they've had 25 million years to figure this out.
but they only live for 2 months.
But
and
can the queen signal with the pheromones so the worker bees are a mile away? Can the queen signal them? Or how?
No. What happens in the hive is that they send scout bees out, and they will go out and they will find the type of resource that the queen wants. And let me give and she's suggesting, okay, I want a particular sort of a nectar or pollen. Now, if you have an apple tree and a dandelion under that apple tree, now any one of us, if we were a bee, which would we go to get nectar? Probably the apple tree. They'll go to the dandelion because it has more sugar content, more nutritious, the pollen is better, and they'll ignore the apple tree. However, the dandelion stops producing nectar by about noon. So once it shuts down, the bees aren't going to go to it, and they'll pollinate the apple tree. So they go and they search for particular types of good areas for the good pollen and the nectar particularly. They come back into the hive, and then they perform what's called a waggle dance. And an Austrian by the name of von Fritsch figured this
That's
out.
what Jay does. Jay
Yeah.
has a good waggle dance,
You
right,
got
Jay?
that?
Yeah.
And this dance,
Little waggle.
this dance is done sort of in figure eights and zigzags, and it tells the other bees how far, what direction, and what the resource is. Now, this guy figured this out and got a Nobel Prize for it. The interesting thing about this is that they're coming back and you're imagining this bee doing a dance. And,
Yeah.
and I've seen it, and it's an amazing thing. But inside the hive, it's completely dark. They can't see each other. So how they communicate is with their antenna. So they're signaling all this stuff with their antenna. And if that bee can convince the other bees this is a good place to go, then that's where those bees will go and get the worker bees will go. And,
Touchdown dance.
Yeah.
Let's score that
That's
touchdown.
crazy.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about how far and how do they get there and how do they get back.
Mhm.
A bee has, I talked about the 2 eyes on the side, the compound eyes. They actually have 3 eyes on top of their head. And they act like a GPS system in triangulation. And they use the sun's polarization light to tell them, I got to go that direction. They know how far, and that tells them how to get back with that same polarization and tracking system they've got on top of their head. And this is a brain the size of a grain of salt.
That they learn in 2 months.
Yeah. Well, they're born with it.
Well, Ed, we're getting up a little bit up against it. What else in that little bag of tricks
So,
over there you want to show us?
We talked about bees. The honeybees are incredibly important for the pollination to
Right.
current plants, crops, things like that.
I bet.
But there's some
Right.
things that people don't realize that the bees produce, that if we lose them, we're out of those. One of those is cotton. How many? Everybody's got something that's got cotton on today.
Mm-hmm.
Cotton is pollinated by honeybees. They will be gone. You have coffee today,
Mm-hmm.
you will lose Starbucks. All the coffee will be gone. Anyone have any chocolate recently?
Of course.
Valentine's?
Monica.
Of
Monica.
course.
It's gone.
Love my chocolate.
The agave plant, it's partially pollinated by bats and bees. So you lose tequila. You lose
Too strong for my blood, but I
Oh,
got
look,
You-
Chef,
you
have a
lose
shot.
the
Shot glass.
lime, so you don't have margaritas anymore.
Oh man.
And then, as I
Or your
said,
Corona.
Coronas, yeah.
yeah, there's you
Oh,
can't
your
drink.
Corona.
So there's a lot of other things that have are dependent on the honeybees, and I'll even say those solitary bees. There's a solitary bee called an alkali bee, which is not used, but they have to grow alfalfa near where that alkali bee lives, and it's a solitary bee all by itself. But there'll be thousands and tens of thousands in an area. They need those bees to reproduce and or pollinate alfalfa. And the alfalfa doesn't pollinate itself, but those bees, and that produces a seed, which allows people to grow alfalfa. Alfalfa is a big key component of food source for dairy cattle.
Mm.
So you lose alfalfa, you lose the dairy cow, and then you lose
Oh, my.
bluebell.
What are you going to do about that? Oh.
And,
This
and
is
the,
sad.
the rest of it is just full of
So
stuff.
where do we stand right now in America? Are we doing okay? Because I know 10 years ago or whatever it was that we had a big scare that we're losing the bee.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
So-
where do we stand now?
Let me put it this way. Every year there's studies done, and they contact the beekeepers. What was your loss? How did you lose? What would happen to you if you found out that 40% of the cattle gone,
Oh,
40% of the chickens gone?
Yeah.
That was how many we lost last year, 40%.
Wow.
And that has continued on since about 2006. You may have heard of colony collapse disorder. That's when they really started losing lots of bees. Before that, the loss was more in the range of maybe 6% of beehives were lost. Now we're up in the 30, 40s. In some states, it's as high as 60%.
Hmm.
Now, beekeepers are really clever on reproducing the hives, reproducing queens, making drones, and so they can build their hives back up for the next year. But there's studies that go on about what's causing the colony collapse disorder, and they just don't know. They think it's a combination of this habitat loss, the pesticides. We were talking earlier, so people were familiar with DDT, which that was the thing back in the 50s and 60s that you can use, and they figured out no, that's bad stuff. The newest thing out there is called neonicotinoids. It's not too bad. It's only 6,000 times stronger than DDT, and it's put on plants in they put the neonicotinoid insecticide on the outside of the seed that they plant. It grows up and transmit the insecticide through the nectar that's in the leaves of the plant. So when an insect comes along and chews on that plant, it gets the insecticide and it dies. Well, bee doesn't do that. But a bee gathers the pollen, gathers the nectar, brings it back to the hive. They then store it. So they're bringing back that neonicotinoid poison, put it in the hives,
Concentrating.
And then
concentrating it,
Sure.
and the
Everybody
beeswax
get to it.
is really good about concentrating the poison. And so that's where they live. And one of the theories is that that concentration builds up. The neonicotinoid may not kill the bees and the larvae, but it goes through the hive, and a lot of the bees go out, and they just, their memory is gone, and they can't remember how to get back. Because with the on colony collapse disorder, it's not like you go to your hive and there's, a beehive in the summer has 40 to 50,000 bees in it. It's not like you open a hive and there's all these dead bees. They're just gone. They just disappear overnight. And so that's the big problem. And some of these big professional people who move the hives around, they'll be wiped out of 3,000-4,000 hives.
So even with all the awareness of it, and I see a lot more of it, maybe it's because I'm aware of it now, I'm looking for it or see it, but even though there's a lot more people taking vested interest in it, we're still losing 30% a year.
Yeah.
So what?
That's crazy.
Well, what
So-
can people do?
So, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get hives put in places that are really away from the pesticides, that have the sort of resources for the bees to go gather. And that can be, so you mentioned, someone's backyard. You can certainly put them there. Businesses, if you've got a rooftop, that's a big thing that's happening now. Like Notre Dame, the cathedral that burned, there were beehives on it. And they actually survived. They were in the part that didn't get burned down. George R. Brown Convention Center has beehives at it. And so, we're trying to get hooked up with businesses or people who have enough, I'll say, space that can have a hive, or individuals if they want to have a hive, and we'll manage it for them, or we'll give you some guidance on how to do it. But the thing I also tell people about, taking bees and having bees is that you're going to learn what disappointment's all about, because you will assume hives.
Well, Ed, tell everybody again so they don't they know where to find you at
Okay.
beeharmony.org, right?
Yep.
And that is that BEE,
Yep.
or is it okay? So beeharmony.org to find you, and they can call you up, and because I know in our place of work that we're looking at, I hope we get it soon. We're going to start putting in some hives all over the place, and
Good for you.
yeah, harvesting some.
I did kind of have a question.
Yeah,
Can I
man,
come
sure.
at you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I always dreamed of having my own garden, like fruits, vegetables, and things like that. Nuts. I mean, nuts. I had some that just wowed me when you talked about it. So if I wanted to have a beehive in my garden, in my garden, would it be best? Like, would it actually be like a win-win for both of us? I get the honey, and I get a little something on my fruit and my vegetables. I mean, that's what I guess.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of listening
It's a
to.
healthy environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of these things, particularly in the basket, are not wholly dependent on bees.
Okay.
Other things pollinate, but they have found that when they get the addition of bees, the production kicks up.
Okay.
So the key to having it in your yard is, if you got to use the pesticides, herbicides, whatever sides, follow the directions carefully. You mentioned Agent Orange. Roundup is very chemically similar to Agent Orange, and it is deadly to bees. So if you spray, now if you want to get rid of that weed, spray it last bit of light, so it dries up, it kills the plant. But if the bee gets on that plant and drinks that poison, it's doomed.
So if I wanted to put one in my house, but I didn't want to, I don't want to do a whole lot of maintenance to it, and I don't want to learn as much about it as you have. I want to put it out there and do good, but not have to put a suit on and take care of it. Is that possible too, or you have to maintain it? There's some work to do as a like in Aaron's backyard or something.
So normally you don't do anything with the hive, maybe once a month.
Okay.
And that once a month is more in the spring and summer, because remember I talked about you got these boxes and they begin to fill those frames with the young brood and then honey. Well, as that gets filled, you need to then add another box so they can move up and fill that with honey. If that gets too tight, they will swarm. Now they'll make a new queen and all that, but you know you're going to be off production for a year. So I would never tell anybody to get around a hive without a suit. I mean, you go on the internet, you can see people doing things.
Well,
There's
but how many times do you have to get stung before you get immune to it?
How many times have you got stung?
today. So, when people say, well, what do you have to do to become a master beekeeper? And I say, well, what that really means is if I get stung, I did something really stupid and I should have known better. I have a...
Well, you know what? At a few more years, you come, it looks like you're doing okay, but if you learn a few more things, you might get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
looks like you're coming along okay.
Where I get stung now, I have a complete full suit on me. And I've got jeans and another layer underneath that. So I'll say they might be able to get through, but I doubt it. I have some gloves that are marketed as sting proof. I've been stung about 3 or 4 times through that glove, and it's like, chuck those suckers.
Gosh.
So,
So once a month, you got to do something for that. You got to open up, take a look at it, maybe add another tray or something.
yeah. Now in the winter, this time, up north where the snow, you don't touch it because you can't let them get cold or chilled. Now down here, when I have a pretty day, 70 degrees, sunny, I may go check and open them. The other thing that I'll do on my hives is I'll feed them sugar water. It's just like, the nectar they get from the flower. And so that just helps supplement them, get them through the winter. So it's not that you have to do much with them very often. Mm-hmm. And when they're gentle and calm, it's actually kind of interesting and relaxing. Now, I've got 8 hives up in the woodlands right now, and 7 of them are just the gentlest little hives, and you could open up right now and they wouldn't bother us. And I got one that's just the meanest thing you've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. That's probably the one that Erwin would live in.
That's right.
He just exposed it. He's very
Well, because I
very
mean,
aggressive on
when
the
I was
soccer
little,
field.
I saw a thing on PBS or something, and it said, and there was a beekeeper, a master beekeeper, who'd been stung so many thousand times that it didn't even bother him anymore. Like the bees would just sting him and they'd fly off.
Yeah, I'm going the other direction.
Yeah,
I just
Me
get
too.
worse and worse every time.
Yeah.
But I work hard not to get stung.
Well, any other questions in the house? Ed, anything else that you need to leave us with? Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, if you come across an area, you see bees coming in out of a hole, don't go near it. Because here in the U.S., or down this part of the country, we've got Africanized bees, and they will kill you. Because what happens with them is, as I mentioned, in Africa, they're so aggressive that they'll come out of that hive in hundreds and hundreds. Now, the European bee, there may be only 10 or 12 come out, which is still bad if you get that many stings. But the Africanized hives will come after you. They'll try to kill you. So I tell people, don't go near the hives unless you really know. Now, I've experienced, working with some hives that are Africanized. And I'll tell you what, it had my eyes wide open. It's scary.
So you need a little bit of room in your property if you're going to do one of these things, unless it's a rooftop. You need to have some space.
Well,
You
you're talking about how much, for my, put my plants in the yard. What happens more often than not, they come out of that hive, they come at a 45-degree angle, and they gone. I had a hive that literally sat underneath a lemon tree. When it was time to bloom, thousands of bees a day. It's like, wait, right here, guys, stop right here.
Yeah.
So, but they will come back and they'll fall underneath the things. But you don't need to have your yard set up just for bees. Now I do because I want to attract whatever I can. But
you also have a program where you'll service if someone wanted the bees.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you would service them as well.
We also have a program where, and so what I do is I go and I talk to anybody who wants to hear me. I'll go talk to them. We have a program that a couple of people have done where they can sponsor a hive, and what happens for a 2-year period, they get half the honey from those hive, and so they get something back, and hopefully the amount of honey they get back is far more than what they could go buy it for. And you were talking about the honey and using it on the watermelon. The type of honey you want, and to help you with allergies and things like that, you need to buy it from, I'll say, the guy on the street that's selling it on the roadside, because what you want is pure honey that's still got its pollen in it. most of the honey that you're going to buy from the store has been pasteurized and filtered, and once you pasteurize and heat it up, you're going to take out and knock out all the good products, the vitamins and things like that. And if you filter it at that level, all the pollen gets out, and that's what helps you with allergies.
Right.
And so you want that. That's your focus. And so they also talk about organic honey. I wouldn't try to focus on that, because
How can you promise it's organic if the bee is going?
exactly
Yeah,
they
yeah.
go that far out. How do you?
Yeah.
Unless you were way out in West Texas somewhere and knew
Yeah.
it wasn't having pesticides.
Well, I sure do appreciate you coming in. That's beeharmony.org, and thanks for spending some time with us. And we're all a little bit more educated.
Yeah.
So now you know you don't have to freak out, AD,
No, I
when,
don't.
when
I don't.
bee come
Probably
around.
still will.
I just smell good. That's
Yeah.
all. I can take that with me. I can take that with me.
So, Ed, thanks for coming in, and always a pleasure. And hopefully, we're going to do and get some business going soon.
Great. Thank you.
at the club.
Appreciate it.
So, all right, guys, that's another episode of the Recipe Gourmet Club Live. And again, we want to thank our sponsors. We have the Scottsdale School of Culinary Arts, and I want to thank them for trusting us with the show. And if you're looking for an online education, you know where to go. Just go to the Scottsdale School of Culinary Arts. I don't care if you have a job or if you're anywhere around the United States, you can go and get that education while you're there. And also Aceway Incorporated, they'll clean anything, whether you're an apartment building or if you're an office building or if you're a kitchen, they will clean it, and they have a great attention to detail. So, all right, that's another episode. And also, go to our other show, the Recipe Unplugged. You have to search that one separately. That's a Recipe Unplugged, and that's with our in-house comedian A.D. Hodge. And you can check out those shows. So you have to download that one and subscribe, okay? And also another trick on any of our shows, I get this question all the time. People text me and ask me, hey, have you done any shows lately? There's 3 little dots on where you listen to your podcast. And if you push those 3 little dots, and you press, what is it, Monica? It's recent show.
Most recent show first.
Play the most recent show, and that way it'll keep you up to date, and you'll see the shows as they download. So that's kind of a big secret. Otherwise, they just load randomly, which is ridiculous and stupid. So I don't know why they do that. So thank you guys for trusting us with the show and listening to us, and subscribe. We've been iTunes top 50 several times now, and we're proud of that, and it's all because of you. So remember, you're special, you're great. Get off your ass and do something today. See you next time.